So the story jumps forward about 50 years now. Israel and Judah have become two kingdoms again. Ahab is the king of Israel. Ahab is known as a king who doesn't really follow the ways of God. He's married to a woman from outside of Israel and Judah, and she has brought the worship of Baal, who is an idol worshipped by the nations surrounding Israel. Many people of Israel had begun worshiping Baal too. Now Elijah is a prophet who was sent by God to Ahab and the people of Israel to call them back to the ways of God. And when we pick up the story, Ahab and Elijah have already had a couple of confrontations. There was a drought in Israel that had been going on for about 3 years. Because there was a drought, there was also a famine. When there isn't enough rain, food doesn't grow. God spoke to Elijah and told him, go to Ahab, and then God would send rain. When Ahab saw Elijah, he said, is that you, the one who is causing trouble for Israel? And Elijah responded, I'm not causing trouble for Israel. You did when you turned away from God and followed Baal. Elijah issued a challenge. He told Ahab to gather all 450 of the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, and both he, Elijah, and the prophets of Baal would each build an altar to make an offering, and they would see which God answered with fire. So they gathered at Mount Carmel, and Elijah let the prophets of Baal go first. They built an altar and sacrificed a bull, and they called on Baal for hours and hours, but there was no answer. They danced around the altar, but nothing happened. Elijah started making fun of them, and he said, shout louder. Maybe he's out for a walk, or he's sleeping, or traveling somewhere. The prophets of Baal called out louder and louder, but there was no answer, and finally they all collapsed. Then Elijah built an altar, and he sacrificed a bull. He dug a trench around the altar and poured water over the bull and the wood and the altar until all of them were dripping wet. And then Elijah prayed, Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant. I have done all of these things at your instructions. Answer me, Lord. Answer me so that these people will know that you, Lord, are the real God and you can change their hearts. Then the Lord sent fire from heaven, and it burned up the sacrifice and the wood, and it dried out the water and the rocks crumbled so that only dust was left. The people saw this, and they fell on their faces and cried out, the Lord is the real God. The Lord is the real God. The people repented and turned back to God, and the Lord blessed them with rain and food once more.